Very good morning, everyone. Welcome into today's daily Bible reading for Tuesday. Today is April the 19th. We are going to be reading today in Jeremiah chapter 43 and also Matthew chapter 24. Thanks so much for taking time. Excuse me. Thanks so much for taking time to join in with our daily Bible reading for today. Hope that you've had a great start to your week. It is a much more expected spring day today than yesterday. It got kind of dreary and cold yesterday all of a sudden. I walked outside, about froze, had to bust out the long pants and the pullover again. But thankfully today seems to be a much more of a shorts and short sleeve type of day. Good weather outside today, beautiful day, but it's always a good day. It's always a beautiful day to be in God's word. So thanks for tuning in. Let's get into the text of Jeremiah chapter 43. Thankfully, it is beautiful outside because the text we're going to be reading today, well, they're not so great, at least from the perspective of what they contain and the unfortunate circumstances that they are describing. Both of these texts today are predicting judgments, very strong judgments, even destructive judgment, we might say, here in Jeremiah 43 and also Matthew chapter 24. And they both revolve around the fact that God's people have rebelled. They have rejected him. They've not listened to his word. They have broken the covenants. They have not returned to God in repentance and faithfulness. And because of that, there's going to be judgment here in Jeremiah 43. It seems as if Johanan and some others thought that maybe they could escape the judgment of God by heading down to Egypt. But God says, I'll find you there too. And I'll send the Babylonians down to punish you in Egypt. And then once we get to Matthew 24, we're going to see the destruction of Jerusalem detailed by Jesus. And it's two tough texts to read together because we are given insight into the reality of what happens when God's patience reaches its end, when it is time for judgment to take place. We see that here within these two texts. So we'll read that together here in Jeremiah 43 and also Matthew chapter 24. Jeremiah 43 and verse number 1. Remember that in chapter 42, Johanan and those associated with him had asked for the Lord for Jeremiah to go to the Lord. Let's see here. Back up here in verse number 5. They said to Jeremiah, let's see here. First, they say that our petition has come before you and that you would pray to the Lord on our behalf. Jeremiah says, okay, I will pray to the Lord and I will tell you everything that he says. They respond with, may the Lord be true and faithful. May the Lord be a true and faithful witness against us. If we don't act according to every word the Lord your God sends you to tell us, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, we will obey the Lord our God to whom we are sending you so that it may go well with us. We will certainly obey the Lord our God. At least that's what they say. For unfortunately, once we get down to the end of this short chapter, we see that Jeremiah says, well, you're actually not going to. I know you. God knows you. He knows that you are not going to obey, but you have not obeyed the Lord your God in everything he has sent me to tell you. I think there's some foreshadowing here. He knows what's going to happen. And then once we get down here to chapter 43, we see the fruition of it. That when Jeremiah, this is Jeremiah 43, verse number 1, when Jeremiah had finished speaking to all the people, all the words of the Lord their God, all these words the Lord their God had sent him to give them, then Azariah, son of Hoshea, Johanan, son of Kareah, and all the other arrogant men responded to Jeremiah, you are speaking a lie. The Lord our God has not sent you to say, you must not go down to Egypt to stay there for a while. Rather, Baruch, son of Neriah, is inciting you against us to hand us over to the Chaldeans, to put us to death, or to deport us to Babylon. So Johanan, son of Kareah, all the commanders of the armies and all the people failed to obey the Lord's command, which, hey, real fast, let's go back up here. You have not obeyed the Lord your God in everything he has sent me to tell you. Here it is right here. All the people failed to obey the Lord's command to stay in the land of Judah. Instead, Johanan, son of Kareah, and all the commanders of the armies led away the whole remnant of Judah, those who had returned to stay in the land of Judah from all the nations where they had been banished. So there was a dispersion of Jews. Then they had come back to the Jewish land, and now they're leaving again. Verse 6, they led away the men, women, children, kings, daughters, and everyone whom Nebuzaradan, captain of the guards, had allowed to remain with Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan. They also led the prophet Jeremiah and Baruch, son of Neriah, away. They went to the land of Egypt because they did not obey the Lord. They went as far as Tapanhes. Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah at Tapanes, pick up large stones and set them in the mortar of the brick pavement that is in the opening of Pharaoh's palace at Tapanes. Do this in the sight of the Judean men and tell them, this is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says. I will send for my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and I will place his throne on these stones that I have embedded, and he will pitch his pavilion over them. He will come and strike down the land of Egypt, those destined for death, to death, those destined for captivity, to captivity, and those destined for the sword, to the sword. I read that, and that did not sound very good. Let me read that again. He will come and strike down the land of Egypt, those destined for death, to death, those destined for captivity, to captivity, and those destined for the sword, to the sword. There we go. I will kindle a fire in the temples of the Egyptians' gods, and he will burn them and take them captive. He will clean the land of Egypt as a shepherd picks lice off his clothes, and he will leave them unscathed. He will smash the sacred pillars of the sun temple in the land of Egypt and burn the temples of the Egyptian gods. Jeremiah chapter 43. They had a chance. They asked. We give them, I don't know, maybe we give them some credit for asking, but it seems as if their mind was made up already. They were wanting more so in chapter 42. They were wanting more so for the Lord to confirm what they already wanted than to actually hear what God wanted them to do, which is why whenever they did not hear what they wanted to hear, they just said, oh, well, that's a lie. We're going to go against it. So they end up going down to Egypt after they accused Jeremiah of not being from the Lord, after they accused Jeremiah of lying, after they accused him of being just a pawn of Baruch, which none of that makes much sense at all. But by the time they get down to Egypt, we have here Jeremiah's final action sermon, as is detailed for us in this writing that bears his name. And what happens is that he takes these stones, puts them in mortar, and he puts them at the opening of Pharaoh's palace there in Tapanes, and says, hey, this palace not going to belong to you much longer, because the Lord says, I want to call my servant Nebuchadnezzar. That's so important for us to recognize that language there, my servant Nebuchadnezzar, showing that God has the power to move men and kings and kingdoms as he wishes, that they are hit. If anybody here's a pawn, it is the nation of Babylon is a pawn of God to do what he needs to do to his people, depending on how they respond to him. If they would serve the Lord, there would be no need for punishment, but their rebellion is going to bring punishment against them. That's true in this case as well. Basically, the judgment that came against Jerusalem, that they had escaped in a sense, is now going to come to Egypt. It's not going to come to Tapanes. They were running to men, and they were running to gods in a sense that they thought could deliver them. But all they were doing was running to seek protection from men and from gods that were destined to be destroyed. That's really all it comes down to. They thought they could find shelter, that they could find deliverance and other things. And yet God is showing them once again that there is nothing that has the power to deliver them except him. Nothing at all. They sought after the famed Egyptians and their pharaohs, their armies, their gods, and nothing. Babylon would come and destroy them as well. And we're going to see in chapter 44, then there's going to be judgment against, there's going to be more details concerning what is going to take place here in Egypt concerning God's judgment against his people. Going to be a bit of a longer chapter 44, got a total, let's see, about 30 verses. We're going to have some more detail then. And then we will continue to make our way through Jeremiah chapter 45. It's super short, just a little message to Baruch. And then the text seems to finish out. Let me look ahead real fast. Finally got my Bible back. Was able to remember to bring it back from the building this week, as opposed to the last 2 Wednesdays and Sundays. Yeah, the rest of the text, it seems, a lot of it's going to be dealing with more of the judgments against the nations, which is very similar to what we saw in Isaiah. Isaiah's section of that was further at the beginning of the book. But we'll read that tomorrow, beginning in Jeremiah 44, looking at God's continued judgment against his people as they thought they could escape to Egypt. So we'll see that in Jeremiah 44. All right, hopping on over and then to Matthew's gospel, Matthew chapter 24. This is the destruction of the temple predicted, the destruction of Jerusalem predicted again. And all we see really, and it's just cycles, really, for God's people. It's just cycles. They rebel against God and he punishes. They rebel against God and he punishes. They rebel against God and he punishes. And here is the last time, it seems, that God punishes the Jewish people as a whole. I believe that what we see here in Matthew chapter 24 is predicting what's going to happen, what history tells us happens in AD 70, when when Jerusalem is just ransacked and just destroyed and brought to the ground. No, there's a lot here in this text that gets people really excited, because the language here is apocalyptic in nature. Some of the things that are talked about here, and that gets people a bit fired up, because they start thinking of the dispensational eschatology that's around today, whether it's premillennialism or postmillennialism or amillennialism, all those millennialisms. We're not going to worry about that in just this reading. I just want to focus from this text, and we'll notice that as we go through. Once we get done reading, I'll just bring that to our attention. So don't worry, we're not going to get bogged down in that today. We'll say that for a Bible class or something else, not for just a daily reading. Well, let's read here in Matthew 24, beginning in verse number 1. As Jesus left and was going out of the temple, his disciples came and called his attention to its buildings. He replied to them, "Do you see all these things? Truly, I tell you, not one of them will be left here on another that will not be thrown down." So just pause for a second. Remember what we've seen up to this point as Jesus is entering Jerusalem. And back in chapter 21, this is his final entry into Jerusalem. He knows what's about to take place. He ends up coming in this royal way on the donkey with a colt. He cleanses the temple. He accepts praise from the people and from children. And he ends up being challenged. His authority is strongly challenged by the religious leaders, which leads him into offering them 3 parables that they recognize, especially after the second one, that he is definitely talking about them. That when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they knew he was speaking about them. Although they were looking for a way to arrest him, they feared the crowds because the people regarded him as a prophet. So they want to arrest him. Why? Well, because they're going to kill him. They want to kill him. We go back to Matthew chapter 12. We see that spoken of for the first time. And that's just what they want to do. They want to kill him. They want to kill Jesus. So he gives this parable in chapter 22, gives more teachings at the end through 22 and the 23. The Pharisees and the scribes themselves are specifically rebuked. We read that yesterday, but it's really just a judgment against Jerusalem as a whole. At the end of 23, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children as hens gather her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. So here is an expansion upon that thought. Jesus says what he says at the beginning of 24 that we just said. Look at all these things. The disciples are saying, hey, look at the buildings of the temple complex are so beautiful. And Jesus says, oh, well, don't worry. It's going to be gone soon. It's going to be gone before too long. So he says this, and then they seem to keep on walking. And yet while they're sitting on the Mount of Olives, verse number 3, the disciples obviously have been thinking about this, like, hey, what were you talking about? So they approach him privately and said, tell us, when will these things happen? What is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus replied to them, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many. You are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these events are the beginning of labor pains. Then they will hand you over to be persecuted, and they will kill you. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. Because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. The good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, Standing in the holy place, let the reader understand a little parenthetical from Matthew. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains, and a man on the housetop must not come down to get things out of his house, and the man in the field must not go back to get his coat. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for at that time there will be great distress, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now, and never will again. Unless those days were cut short, no one would be saved, but those days will be cut short because of the elect. If anyone tells you, see, here is the Messiah, or over here, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Take note, I have told you in advance. So if they tell you, see, he's in the wilderness, don't go out there. And see, he's in the storerooms, do not believe it. For the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not shed its light. The stars will fall from the sky. The powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sun and the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the peoples of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. Then two men will be in the field. One will be taken, one will left. One woman will be grinding grain with a handmill. One will be taken, one left. Therefore, be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. But know this, if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not let his house be broken into. This is why you're also to be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master has put in charge of his household to give them food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom the master finds doing his job when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says in his heart, my master is delayed, and starts to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, that servant's master will come on a day he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know. He will cut him to pieces and assign him to a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew chapter 24. Now, as I mentioned previously, there's so much. I mean, you just dissect so much of this text and try to figure out if the destruction of Jerusalem ends in a certain place and there is then a transition to talking about the final judgment. I mean, there's different places where people do that. Some people say that all of this has to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. Some say none of it has to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. It is a very hotly contested text. And yet, here is what I want us to focus on. Let me see here. Let me see real fast. All right. I want to focus right here. Focus right here in verse 43. But know this, that if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not let his house be broken into. This is why you're also to be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So we think about judgment that's coming in, whether it be judgment on Jerusalem, whether it be the final judgment with the return of Jesus. The reality is that there has been a warning that judgment is coming. And this was true going back to Jeremiah's day, going back to Isaiah's day, Going back to the days of all the prophets, there was a warning that judgment was coming. And God, because he is gracious and merciful, has allowed his people throughout time to know that judgment is coming. And there's an opportunity then, because we know judgment is coming, there's an opportunity for us to be ready for it. No, we might not know exactly when that judgment is coming. We might not know that. For us specifically, thinking about the return of Jesus. And if you were in our worship service last Sunday, you kind of saw that graphic that I had. That was kind of a cool way to understand how time is working and such, in reference to the return of Jesus. I really like that. I appreciate that. I think it helps me to understand, to visualize that a little better. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out our website, loudandcoc.org, where we have our sermons. The slides are posted, the audio is posted, the video is posted, and you can see what I'm talking about in that lesson in regards to the last days, or the last times, the last hour. We talked about that on Sunday a little bit. So if you're curious about that, you go find that there on loudandcoc.org. Check out our sermons tab, select sermons, and you can see what I presented on Sunday. That was April the 17th. I talked from 1 John chapter 2, verses 18 through 27, about the Antichrist that is described by John there. So you can go check that out if you're curious. But nonetheless, we see here that judgment is coming. And because God has graced us with knowing that judgment is coming, we have the opportunity to be ready. So that for us is the thought for today. Are we ready? Are we preparing ourselves for that day, for that judgment? Because we don't know when it is coming. I don't believe that what we have in Scripture for us regarding the second coming of Christ, I don't believe we have any sort of roadmap. I don't think we have any sort of itinerary. I don't think we have a message of signs that whenever you see this, this, and this, know that Jesus' return is near. I don't believe. I think that has been sensationalized by a number of religious people, professing religious people. And you know what? It's sold a lot of books, and it's sold a lot of movies, tickets to movies. It has produced a lot of tickets to conferences and stuff, but I don't believe that the text gives us anything in that nature. What the text tells us is to be ready, because it could come at any time, like a thief in the night can come like at any time. And even if Matthew 24, speaking, I'm not telling you what I think about Matthew 24, but even if Matthew 24 is purely about the destruction of Jerusalem, we cannot forget what is said in 2 Peter chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3 tells us with great certainty that when everything goes down, when the day of the Lord happens, that it will come like a thief. And on that day, the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, the elements will burn and be dissolved, and the earth and its works on it will be disclosed. And since all these things are to be dissolved in this way, it is clear what sort of people you should be in holy conduct and godliness as you wait for the day of God and hasten its coming. So we know. We don't know when, but we know what, and we know how we should be prepared. So today, let's think about that. Let's think about our preparedness for that day, whenever it might come. It might be in our lifetimes, it might not be in our lifetimes, but we need to be prepared for that day. And be prepared through holy conduct and godliness. Led Judah and Jerusalem to fall because they were not conducting themselves in that way. It's what led Jerusalem in AD 70 to fall because they had rejected God. And it was time for that to pass on. But for us, we must conduct ourselves in holy conduct and godliness in order to be ready for that day. And if you have any questions about that, if you're watching today and you're wondering about being prepared for that day, if you have any other religious questions about this text or any other text, please feel free to reach out and let us know about that. You can send us a message through our website, as I mentioned earlier, loudandcoc.org, LOUDON. Check out the message tab there. You can get in contact with us there, or just leave a comment here in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great rest of this beautiful Tuesday. I look forward to reading with you again tomorrow from Jeremiah chapter 44.